Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I am not reviewing an episode of The Twilight Zone. I am instead giving my top 5 episodes of Season 4. We wrapped up Season 4 last week with episode 18, and it's been tradition at the end of these seasons to do a top 5, and then as maybe a little bonus afterwards, a little bottom 3, just to, shame the shameful. This was an interesting season to try and do this for, because I will say that some of my top 5 even aren't, well, I mean, no episode's perfect, but typically I would say when we were doing the previous seasons and we had 36 episodes to pick from, it meant that the top 5 were really the cream of the crop and they were really just great episodes with no caveats. I would say that at least a couple of my top 5 in this season do have some caveats. Like they're not through and through amazing start to finish. They're not as good as the standard would normally be. Part of that is maybe because it's just less episodes, there's half as many, so there's half as many chances. But honestly, season 4 as a whole had a lot more middling episodes. There's definitely a few episodes with concepts that I like that I don't think lived up to what those concepts were. There's, I'd say, at least half, if not more than half comfortably probably, felt a little bit too long because they were used to writing for 25 minutes and it felt like they were stretching out to the 50 minutes for the season. The 3 worst episodes was relatively easy. At least 2 of them were. The third one, there was a couple of things contending for that, but we'll get into it, and I'll give my top 5, and we'll see how everyone feels about it in the comments. So, number 5 is No Time Like the Past. This is an episode about a time traveler who's going back from present day to try and fix moments in history. For example, he tries to assassinate Hitler before Hitler does most of his damage, quickly realizes that wasn't going to work, and ends up almost being killed by Nazis. And he tries a couple things, and then the back half of the episode, he's mostly spending in a time period just because he wants to be in a quieter place that's more peaceful, that's better, but quickly finds that there's actually a lot of problems in this time period even, and like there's no perfect there was no perfect time in the past before things got really bad. It's like there was always problems. Like within minutes he's like accused of being a Democrat because this is a time when a lot of people were Republicans and they look very down on Democrats and things like that. It's a really interesting episode. Conceptually it's cool. The idea that he's going back to change big events is a really cool driving force for the episode, and the lesson ultimately being that he can't really change the past, and ultimately he has to just make the future as best as he can. That's really good. I think when I said there was caveats to some of these picks, I do think that the pacing suffers a little in the back half. He, seems to kind of conveniently forget some things and then remember them for some of the story that he's kind of getting involved in with a school teacher. But it's a cool enough concept, and there's enough really fun moments in the episode, and then the ultimate lesson is quite a good science fiction story. So yeah, like I think out of all the sort of like just on the cusp of maybe making it episodes, this was the one that I think I felt I enjoyed the most out of them. I'll mention a couple of honorable mentions at the end that kind of almost made it as well, but this was the one that kind of won out by just a little bit. So that's No Time Like the Past. Number 4 is Valley of the Shadow. This was, I think, episode 3 of the season, and this was the episode where the journalist comes into the small town, and then they won't let him leave because they have this kind of weird utopia where everyone just kind of lives forever. And admittedly, this was like way back at the start of the season, and we had a big gap in the middle of the season, so my memory of some of those early episodes is definitely a little hazy at this point. But this had a unique premise. I remember it keeping me on my toes as to, okay, what exactly is going on here? And then the idea that the townsfolk aren't hostile towards them, they don't want to hurt them or anything like that. They're just like very matter of fact. Oh, you can't leave. Sorry, like you just kind of have to stay. And it kind of, I remember thinking the first couple episodes struggled with the runtime, especially episode 2 that was on the boat and they were sending the deep sea divers down. I remember thinking the pacing in that was, I loved the concept of that episode, but the pacing in it was quite bad, and it kind of turned into more of a ghost episode that I wasn't expecting. This was the first episode of the season where it felt like it really used its runtime to really build up the character, build up his personality, the things that were going to motivate him to try and escape, even though he's kind of in paradise in a lot of ways, but he's been kept there against his will, so he doesn't want to be there. There was interesting themes at play. It felt like It was exploring some cool ideas in a way that felt like a fresh idea for the Twilight Zone. Twilight Zone will often go back to similar ideas. It'll do similar themes, similar topics, similar concepts. Like, it's just something that it does, right? How many episodes has someone walked into their own past and relived a part of their childhood or something akin to that? Like, and that's okay. They try and perfect certain formulas over time and whatever. But this felt like a fresh idea that was a little bit different. And because it wasn't just, oh, we're villains that you can hate, it made the debate of what was right and wrong in the episode a little bit more interesting and a little bit more, dare I say, nuanced. So, yeah, Valley of the Shadow is my number 4. Number 3 was On Thursday We Leave for Home. So this was actually one of the recent ones I did, so I remember it very well, which is handy for this. But yeah, this is the episode where it's this colony that are living on a planet that is pretty barren. They're barely surviving. They hate it there. They've been there for years and years, and they're excited because finally a ship is coming from Earth to take them home. And it's all about the guy who runs this camp, who very quickly starts to really disagree with a lot of the notions that the people who arrive to take them home have, his entire group. He's basically gotten used to being their leader, and he sees himself as a father figure and protector for the group. He's kind of struggling with giving that up. I compared it a lot, and ironically, because the actor went on to play a very similar, well, not a similar character, but a similar, the idea that I'm going to compare it to, which is a prisoner who's been in prison for so long that he's scared of being back in the real world. That he played a character very similar with that idea in mind in Shawshank Redemption. And I didn't know that when I had that thought. It wasn't until I looked him up later, because obviously there's like 40 years, or, well, 30 years between this episode and that movie. So, but I thought the performance was really good and strong. The pacing was mostly solid. There was maybe a little bit of trimming you could do, but not too much. I was pretty pleased with this one, because it was definitely more of a character study. And I think probably all of my top 3 of this season are all strong character study episodes. And I think maybe the reason for that is that because they've got the double runtime, they've got 50 minutes without ads to delve into what's going on with the story, it does give that extra time to really explore the character and give them more subtle, like, ideas and tics, and the little things that they're developing is like, what makes the character scared? What are their motivations? Why do they care about this change that's happening? And I think here it was this character where all the people around him by the end of the episode, I won't get too spoilery here, but by the end of the episode, they all kind of pity him a little bit, and they want to convince him to kind of just, get on board with what's happening. And he's stubborn to a fault. Regrets are had, I'll just say that. But it's, it's kind of like this man losing everything that's made him feel important his entire life. And we see that breakdown happen throughout the episode. And for the most part, it's just really well done. And I had a good time with that one. So, yeah, On Thursday We Leave for Home is my number 3. Number 2 is He's Alive, which notably stars a very young Dennis Hopper. But this is an episode which, it's got kind of a weird setting. It kind of feels like an alternate reality or something, or maybe the near future. But it's this, Dennis Hopper plays this young man who effectively becomes a Nazi over the course of the episode. He's preaching against, groups of people, maybe probably Jewish, I imagine. I can't remember the exact things he was saying in the episode, but he's preaching against things, he's being hateful, and then the big sort of end of first act reveal in this episode is that seemingly a reincarnated or ghost version of Hitler shows up to influence him and talk to him. I probably had seen Jojo Rabbit before I saw this. I probably brought that up as kind of a similar idea, but it's very much about him building this new iteration of a hate group and how he spreads these ideas, how he talks to people, how he has this old friend who has a history with the Nazis, who's someone who seemed to have survived a concentration camp, and these opposing views, and who are trying to convince him not to go down this dark path. So like I just said in the last entry, like, this was also a character study episode. This was a study of someone hateful and how that hate consumes them and then spreads to others, and how alone they feel, and how, like, all of it kind of comes down to the motivations for why he's doing this, or analyzing and trying to understand what's led him down this path and why it's so difficult for him to turn away from it. And I really liked that. It was a really moody episode. Like, I remember the first appearance of the Hitler showing up being very, very stylish with the shadows and the way he walked into frame. I remember it feeling like a very stark episode that had a really strong directorial style. And then the performance from Hopper was really good. Like, this was very much an episode where everything was firing on all cylinders. And I think, you know, I've liked the 3 episodes I've mentioned, and obviously increasingly. 3 especially I thought was very good, the one I just talked about. But He's Alive, I think, out of this top 5 is the first great episode I'm talking about. This was a great episode of TV and did a lot of really cool things. So I would sing its praises. It was very, very good. Which leads me to my number 1, which obviously, given I said number 2 was a great episode, I obviously think that about number 1. Number 1 is Miniature, which also stars a notable actor. Robert Duvall is in this episode. I thought this was a very fascinating episode to watch, given the time period it was made. Because this is about a character who becomes obsessed with this dollhouse at a museum. He goes and visits it all the time, and he starts to see the people in the dollhouse move around as if they're alive, and he becomes obsessed with coming to talk to them, and they become kind of like his friends that he wants to go see. But what was so effective about this episode is that this is all about him losing grasp on reality. It's about mental illness, and a lot of the episode focuses on how the people around him react to his increasingly weird behavior and what he's doing, and how they incorrectly diagnose how to try and help him. And you've got them talking to his therapist who give them certain advice, and those discussions that happen in the episode, some of it is a bit outdated, but you can see them poking at the right ideas, and you can see the therapist challenging some of the ways they're trying to deal with them. You know, at least one of the characters, maybe it's the mother character, who's very like, no, we have to kind of lock him in a room and like try and stop him from going. It's all just about how we react to someone and treat someone who needs help, right? Who mentally needs help. This is someone who, you know, the character, you know, he's not got this great job. He doesn't like his job very much, or at the very least, it's stressful. He has this existence where he comes home, and you know, it's kind of this sad existence. If I remember correctly, because this one was a while ago that I watched it, but if I remember correctly, you know, he's unmarried. I think he lives with like his mother, and then he's got like a sibling and their spouse are the other main characters, and they all love him. They all want to like help him. They all want to do things for him. But there are definitely times where they just sort of tell him to snap out of things and grow up, and it's kind of you know, it's not this understanding approach that, you know, it should be taken, or at least, you know, we have a better understanding or idea of how we should tackle these things when it comes to mental health. And I thought it's just the exploration of that was very good. I thought Robert Duvall was great in the episode, and I think this was one where the kooky Twilight Zone ending, I won't spoil what it is, it's not the most surprising ending in the world, right? Because I think a lot of Twilight Zone endings you can kind of predict. There was an episode this season with a guy like collecting wax figures because the wax figure museum is going out of business, and he's obsessed with collecting them. And I don't think it takes a very intelligent mind to predict that by the end of the episode, some of those wax figures are probably going to come to life, because it's a very Twilight Zone thing to do, right? You see that coming a mile off. And I think in the end of this one, you can probably see coming, you know, maybe not as predictable, but you can probably guess it. But the reason why that doesn't matter, and the reason why it works so well, and it's one of the best endings of this season, is because it works so well with the themes that the episode was playing with the entire time. It plays into, ultimately, you know, it's an allegory for what will happen if you don't help someone with mental illness. And I thought it worked so well with everything it did, is, you know, it kind of comes across as maybe kind of a happy ending, but it's really not. If you actually stop and analyze it and think about it, it's kind of a tragedy. And I think it was really good. I think it was a really deep episode that really stood out. And I think Miniature and He's Alive do stand out amongst this season. They're easily the best 2 episodes. I think On Thursday We Leave for Home obviously is next down and really solid. Valley of the Shadow was solid. I think No Time Like the Past is a good episode. Some other ones that were kind of in contention for that 5th spot were The Parallel, which is the guy who is the astronaut who comes back down, but things are different. And then by the end, he sort of goes back to his own like Earth, effectively. And it's a fun concept. I remember thinking that one could have been a lot shorter, but it was a fun concept, so I liked them playing around with it. It just wasn't, as good as these other ones. And then Death Ship, which again, really cool concept, where it's these guys in a spaceship who land on a planet and find an exact duplicate of their ship with, I think, 3 dead bodies, and then theorize like how this happened and how they could try and avoid this. And I remember some of the directions it took and conclusions they made to be a bit silly, which is why I think that one wasn't as in contention. But the concept was really fun, and I think I was hoping for more out of that one. But yeah, my top 5 is No Time Like the Past at number 5. Number 4 is Valley of the Shadow. 3 is On Thursday We'll Leave for Home. 2 is He's Alive, and 1 is Miniature. With those top 2 especially being, I think, all-timers for Twilight Zone. So, very good stuff. It's definitely a weirder season. There's a lot of mixed episodes, and maybe not as many greats, but I mean, in terms of percentages, maybe it's not that much of a reduction compared to if we'd had double the episodes, but it does stick out. And I think the problem is the bad episodes probably feel even worse than usual because they're longer. At least a bad episode of Twilight Zone the last 3 seasons was only 25 minutes. The bad episodes in season 4 take a while to get through, relatively speaking. And that leads me on to the other part of this, which is my worst 3 episodes of season 4 of the Twilight Zone. So number 3 is I Dream of Jeannie, which is just Twilight Zone doing a lighthearted comedy episode about a genie who's trying to help this hopeless guy who basically just imagines, or I can't remember if he actually gets the wishes or he just thinks about the wishes that he would make, but they're basically they all go badly. He imagines being with the love of his life, he imagines being president, he imagines being other things, and it's basically just a little anthology of him being in these absurd situations where things don't turn out the way he'd want to. Like the idea that no matter what, everything's always going to be ruined, no matter what he gets from the genie. It just, it kind of repeats itself quite a bit and ultimately isn't as funny. Like, Twilight Zone typically is not that great at comedy, and I think this sticks out in that way. It's not as bad as 1 and 2, which were easily my 1 and 2, but it sort of got ahead of a few other really mediocre episodes to take that number 3 spot. At number 2 is The Bard, and this one's easy to remember because it's the one that I did last week. This is the writer who uses black magic to conjure up William Shakespeare so that Shakespeare will write his screenplays for him. Hilarity ensues, quote unquote. Yeah, I really didn't like this one. Again, Twilight Zone with comedy, never a great thing. I feel like it devolves into just him enjoying the success and then Shakespeare punching a guy. It does notably have a young Burt Reynolds in it, briefly. He's not the main character, it's someone else. But it really is just a meta episode where Rod Serling's taking a lot of swipes at the TV system and TV executives, and I'm sure he loved getting all that off his chest, but I don't think it makes for a particularly compelling episode of The Twilight Zone. I feel like you could have done more with comparing how the modern world might not react the same way to modern Shakespeare writing the way they did to, the way people in the day reacted to his original writing and how that's kind of endured over time. Maybe play with that a bit more. I just felt like it didn't do anything that interesting with its concept. Lighthearted episode, and sometimes Twilight Zone can pull off a lighthearted episode, but this was not one of those times. So I will say The Bard is comfortably at number 2, which leaves us with the worst episode of season 4 of the Twilight Zone. There was a bang outside, which is why I paused there for a second. Number 1 is Jess Bell, which was an episode about a scorned woman who was in love with a man who was getting ready to marry another woman, and she's jealous, and she goes to a witch and demands to put a curse on him or the fiance. I can't remember. That's the thing with the bad episodes, is that they leave my mind a lot easier than the good ones, but this is just... this was one that I kind of knew was going to be bad before I watched it. I remember when I looked at it the next time on and read the description, I was like, oh, this sounds like a painful episode. And it was. It was, jealous stuff. It was witch tropes. It was old-time romance stuff. And when I say that, what I mean is like young couple fall in love basically after one day and talk about getting married. And there's a whole segment of the episode where the evil Jezebel, which obviously is close to Jezebel, you know, if you hadn't got that reference, she like possesses the fiance at one point, and there's a whole thing. I just got nothing out of it. I didn't like the characters. I didn't like the concept. You know, Twilight Zone, by and large, I don't think I like episodes that are just using magic. And I guess that tracks with the last one, The Bard. In fact, even Dream of Genie. Genies are magic based. I'm just not a magic guy, typically. It takes a really good, solid story and characters to get me through something with magic in it, typically. Right? There's exceptions, of course, but it's not something that sings to me immediately. This was just like a ball of stuff that I don't like, all wrapped up in a not compelling episode that is definitely way over its like runtime that it should be. Like, I don't think it would be good if you cut it in half, but it's certainly not good at 50 minutes, I can tell you that much. So yeah, that was, as soon as I was looking through the list of episodes and I saw the name Jezebel, I'm like, oh no, that's the worst one. That's it. Like, The Bard was bad, but Jezebel was worse. So there you go. That is my worst 3 episodes of season 4 of The Twilight Zone. So I don't know how in line with the consensus I am. You know, I don't really know what people think of any of these episodes. The season 4 episodes don't seem to like have any big ones that people talk about as much. You know, I feel like, you know, there's famous episodes from the other seasons. There's a bunch in season 1 for sure, but even in season 2 and 3, there's ones that stuck out as, oh yeah, I've kind of heard people bring this one up or reference this one. In season 5, it at least has the plane episode with Shatner. I'm looking forward to that one. I've heard so many things about that over the years. But season 4, I don't hear getting talked about as much. So I'm curious if people feel anything similar to me, or if I am like way off killer here and everyone's going to be like, no, you fool, like, these are the best episodes. You like trash, you trash taste man. Because that's how people on YouTube talk, apparently. That is me. That is my thoughts on season 4 of The Twilight Zone, which does mean that next week we will be returning with season 5, episode 1, so look forward to that. And I have to say, I am looking forward to it only being 25 minutes now. That'll be a nice return for the final season. And yeah, obviously when we get towards the end of the season, we'll talk about what might replace Twilight Zone. There's a few potentials. Obviously, there's the 80s version of the Twilight Zone, maybe is the most obvious. There's things like the classic Outer Limits. There's things like, I don't know, what else could you do? I don't know, Hitchcock Presents, your other anthology shows that are either science fiction or horror focused, or something that would be interesting to talk about. Twilight Zone 80s feels like the most obvious thing to jump to, but at the same time, maybe it'd be nice to diversify a little bit and like save that and come back to Twilight Zone at a later time. But regardless, it's something to think about in about 36 weeks, give or take, depending if there's any, you know, off weeks before then. But thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get bonuses for your trouble. I do an exclusive review of Columbo every month. I just started that recently, so I'm not far in. Wouldn't take that much time to catch up. And Columbo is free to watch on Freevee, so it would be very easy to watch the show along with me if you wanted to. But you can get access to that. Plus, there's bonuses for all the movie podcasts and movie review shows that we do over Mail Fuzz Movies. So you can get all that on Patreon together as one package at, you know, various tiers. Or if you just want the Columbo bonus and still want to support the channel, you can do that as just becoming a YouTube member on the YouTube channel if that's more your thing. But thank you very much for joining me. Hit the like button. Helps out a lot. People will find the show and the channel a lot easier if you do. That is me. Thank you once again. I'll see you next time. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.